Have you ever wondered why, even before the light existed, the abyss was already there? This isn't a common question, but perhaps, deep down, you've always felt there was something strange about the way creation is told. Since childhood, we've heard about let there be light, the divine beginning, but what came before that? Why does Genesis itself mention darkness and the abyss as if they had always been there, lurking, like silent witnesses to the birth of the world? What you're about to discover may surprise you. Not everything in Scripture is taught in churches. And when we begin to look deeper into the apocryphal texts, into the hidden layers of the Bible, into the forgotten words of ancient Hebrew, the abyss ceases to be just a dark place. It becomes a symbol, a presence, perhaps even a part of the divine plan itself. Have you ever sensed that there's a hidden truth behind creation? That the universe was shaped with more mystery than we've been told? Stay with me until the end, because today we'll explore one of the deepest enigmas of occult theology. Was the abyss a punishment or part of God's original design? In Jewish tradition, the abyss is called Tehom, a word shrouded in shadows, linked to primordial chaos. But what's most intriguing is that this term appears before after the creation of light, the firmament, even time. Why would God allow something so dense and obscure to exist in the first place? Or was it He Himself who shaped it? The answers aren't obvious. And that's precisely why this video goes far beyond what you've heard from pulpits or read in ordinary books. We'll cross the boundaries between the biblical narrative and the mysteries of creation, revealing hidden layers, forbidden interpretations, and perhaps a new way of understanding the origin of everything. But before diving into this abyss of revelations, you need to open your eyes and your mind, because what comes next could completely change your perspective on how it all began. If this topic resonates with you, if at any point you felt there was something wrong with the official versions of creation, leave a comment below with what resonated with you so far. Your opinion, your experience, or even that question you've never had the courage to ask, it all matters. It truly does. This channel was created precisely for this. To be a space where the mysteries of creation can finally be discussed with depth, respect, and boldness. And if you've come this far feeling that same vibration, that same calling for something greater, then leave a like. It's not just a button. It's a sign that this type of content has value and deserves to continue being produced. And of course, if you want to be part of this journey, if you want to continue accessing revelations like this, subscribe to the channel. Your presence here is what keeps this flame burning. Each new subscriber, each comment, each like is a force that pushes this message forward, so that more people like you have access to what has been hidden for centuries. Because deep down, we're not alone in this quest. We're part of something bigger, something that perhaps is being awakened right now. Now I want to go even deeper into the subject. Imagine the moment before time, before light, before form. The instant when only the invisible, the eternal, the untouchable existed. This is where the biblical text surprises us. And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The abyss was already there, present, recognized, named. But how is this possible? If God created everything, why would He begin His divine narrative from chaos? Why not exclude it altogether? This is where the hidden truth begins to emerge. And perhaps it requires a transformation of our mindset. Because, contrary to what many have imagined, the abyss is not just a mistake that needs to be corrected. In some mystical traditions, it is a field of infinite possibilities. What comes before order, what prepares a space for manifestation. Chaos, therefore, would not be an accident, but an indispensable part of the plan. And if this is true, the impact is profound, for it forces us to rethink everything we've learned about good and evil, creation and punishment, light and darkness. Perhaps the abyss didn't arise as punishment for an angelic rebellion. Perhaps it was a first stage, the first spiritual structure where the divine moved before revealing its light. Have you ever considered this? This vision is not new, but it has been forgotten. In texts considered apocryphal, such as the Book of Enoch, the abyss appears not only as a place of imprisonment, but as a boundary between worlds, a kind of veil, an interval where eternal decisions were made. Could it be an echo of God's own consciousness? A region where time had not yet been measured? This line between mystery and the manifest is what arouses such fascination. It's as if the Creator left clues behind the scenes of creation, signs hidden in ancient words like Tehom, the Hebrew term for abyss, which carries more layers than one might imagine. Linguists and esoteric scholars argue that this word doesn't simply mean a hole or depth, but kind of primordial matter, something that precedes even the verb. This changes everything, because if the abyss predates order, then perhaps it was the spiritual womb of all we know, a dark, silent womb where divine intention gestated before manifesting itself. This gives the abyss a completely different role, not as an enemy of the light, but as its inevitable complement. Darkness not as punishment, but as gestation. And at this point in the journey, something begins to reveal itself. The abyss is also a mirror. It shows what lies behind appearances. It takes us inward. It invites us to cross what is frightening, to find what is eternal. It's no wonder that so many ancient myths speak of heroes who descend into the underworld, not as punishment, but as a rite of passage. It is there deep within that the hidden truth appears. And perhaps that's why, to this day, so many spiritual traditions use silence, darkness, and emptiness as portals of revelation. This initial void may have been the first step in creation, or perhaps the last remnant of something that came before. A previous cycle, an ancient reality, banished but not destroyed, because what is eternal cannot be erased, only transformed. And the abyss seems to carry this memory. It stands there as a silent witness to something that was denied us, but that pulses within us like an ancestral call. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. If at any point during this dive, something resonated with your soul, because the truth is, we're just beginning to touch the edges of this mystery. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. When we look at Genesis with attentive eyes, not the eyes of habit, but those of a thirst for revelation, something jumps out. The text doesn't begin with the creation of light. It begins with chaos, literally. And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The first image we have of the universe is a dark, formless, and silent vastness, where a nameless abyss already existed. But why is this never the focus? Why do sermons always begin with "let there be light," and completely ignore the prior presence of emptiness and darkness? The answer, perhaps, is not theological, but psychological. The abyss frightens. The void confronts us. It gives us no control. It offers us no certainty. It forces us to face the idea that perhaps not everything was created to be explained. And that's the beauty, because Genesis doesn't say the abyss was created. It's there like a pre-existing scenario, a silent foundation upon which everything begins to take shape. This completely changes the narrative, and if we allow it, it can also change our mindset, because what was taught as something bad, dark, destructive may be precisely what sustains the entire structure. When the Bible says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, it is speaking of the same abyss, a primordial, boundless ocean, where the divine presence does not act immediately. It merely observes, hovers, waits. This in itself is a powerful revelation. God's first move was not to act, but to contemplate, a conscious silence before the infinite. And what does this teach us? That there's power in not knowing, that silence can be as sacred as words, that empty space, contrary to what we think, is not absence, but preparation. The abyss is the place where everything is about to happen. And perhaps, spiritually, it is also the mirror of our own soul when it has not yet been shaped by dogmas, fears, or certainties. This realization opens a way for a different kind of spiritual journey, one where the search is not for quick answers, but for deep understanding, where the experience of the unknown is not avoided, but embraced as an essential part of revelation. This is where true transformation begins, when we stop trying to control the narrative and allow ourselves to immerse ourselves in it. When we analyze the words of Genesis with this perspective, we realize how many layers have been left out in more traditional interpretations. The Hebrew word used for formless and void is tohu v'bohu, an expression that doesn't simply mean disorder, but rather a state of chaotic potency, where everything can be, but nothing yet is. This isn't destruction. This is pure potential. Now imagine the abyss not as punishment, but as the space where God's intention rests before becoming creation. This shifts the focus of the story. The center ceases to be punishment and becomes preparation, shadow as the precondition for light, darkness as the matrix of existence. And if we look at our own lives from this perspective, how many times has our chaos preceded a great turning point? How many times has it been at the bottom of the abyss that we found the impulse for ascension? The biblical text, in this sense, is less a historical record and more a symbolic map of the journey of consciousness. And perhaps each stage of creation represents not only a cosmic event, but also an internal process that we all go through, from darkness to light, from formlessness to purpose, from silence to the word. The abyss then ceases to be feared. It becomes understood. And if the Spirit of God hovered over him, perhaps we should learn to do the same, to hover over our own abysses, to not run from the unknown, realizing that before the light, there's always a dive, a confrontation, a silent revelation that, little by little, transforms us from within. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If at any point this vision resonated within you, because what we're going to explore from here on will take us even deeper into this mystery. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because if the abyss was there before light, before form, before time, then we must courageously ask ourselves, was it created as a punishment, or has it always been part of the divine architecture? This question shifts the narrative. We are no longer looking at the abyss as a pit into which the damned fall. We are beginning to see it as a spiritual structure, as an essential component of existence, perhaps even as a key that reveals the true fabric of creation. Think with me. Everything that was created had a place. Light had its firmament, waters, their boundaries, man his garden. But the abyss was not delimited nor destroyed. It simply remains, almost as if it were necessary for it to exist, as if the abyss were the universe's safety margin, not in the sense of protection, but of expansion, a space where chaos can continue to exist, so that order never becomes tyrannical, a point of balance between light and that which is yet to be understood. In many ancient traditions, this vision was not taboo. It was sacred. Primordial chaos was seen as the raw material of manifestation, and the abyss as a vessel that preceded any decision, a place where possibilities had not yet collapsed, where there is no right or wrong, only the raw field of creation. This changes our relationship to the idea of punishment, because if the abyss came before sin, then it could not have been created because of sin. It is not a consequence. It is a condition. And if we're honest, there's something within us that instinctively understands this. How many times on our spiritual or emotional journey do we need to pass through profound void before being reborn? How many times do we face the fall not as an end, but as a reorganization? The abyss, in this sense, can be seen as a place of suspension, where masks fall, structures crumble, and what remains is only the essence. That point where all seems lost, but it is precisely that something new begins to emerge. That's why, instead of demonizing it, perhaps we should learn to respect the abyss, not as an enemy, but as part of the divine process. What many call the fall may simply be a moment of transition between forms. What many call darkness may simply be the womb of light, and what many call punishment may actually be a point of return, a space where God still speaks, but in a different way. This shift in perspective has a direct impact on the way we live, because we begin to realize that we are not being punished by the universe, but guided by it, that we are not on the margins of the divine, but within its deepest movement. And this generates transformation, because it frees us from guilt and places us in responsibility. It invites us to dive in, to understand that rock bottom is sometimes exactly where the next creation is being generated. This idea also appears in ancient mythologies, and even in psychological archetypes. Jung spoke of the unconscious as this inner abyss where the denied parts of the soul reside. They're not bad, they're just forgotten, denied, and when brought to the light of consciousness, they transform into wisdom. This is why so many healing processes begin with pain, with breaking, with silence, and with the encounter with what's most hidden within us. The abyss, then, isn't just at the beginning of the Bible. It's at the beginning of every rebirth. It's part of the cosmic, spiritual, and personal rhythm, a structure that forces us to stop, to listen, to reflect. And anyone who's been through it knows it's within the darkness that spiritual vision begins to open. Because without distraction, without control, without guarantees, only what truly is remains. And often, that's exactly where God whispers. Write in the comments. That makes sense to me. If at some point in your journey, you too felt that the void wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much greater. Because now, let's delve even deeper into what this abyss represents. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what the canonical scriptures show, the forbidden texts expand, and when the abyss or Tehom appears in these forgotten writings, it ceases to be merely a symbolic image. It becomes a spiritual agent, a space with function, not just form. And this distinction completely changes the course of our understanding. In the book of Enoch, for example, one of the most banned texts in religious history, the abyss is described as a reserved place, a prison built for celestial beings who transgress divine order. But even there's something even more intriguing. This prison already existed. It wasn't created after the fall of the angels. She was already prepared. This means that the abyss was not an emergency response to sin. It was part of the original design, an intentional component of spiritual reality. And this brings us to a very delicate, but also very liberating point. Because if Tehom already existed before the first transgression, then God knew that chaos was inevitable. That free will would entail risk. And yet he allowed it. This shows not only a creator who sets limits, but an architect who anticipates paths, who builds spaces for error, not to punish, but to contain, to recycle, to redeem. This idea also appears in Gnostic traditions, where the abyss is seen as a transition zone between the upper world and the lower world, a corridor, a vortex, a veil between realities. The abyss, in this context, is a place of passage, something like a spiritual quarantine. And this perspective makes us reflect on how many times, throughout our journey, we go through experiences that were not punishments, but preparations, transitions between who we were and who we need to become. In many Kabbalistic accounts, Tehom is not just a region, but a dimension of consciousness, a state where the ego dissolves, where hidden truths are revealed as all human structures crumble. The abyss, in this case, is not a punishment imposed from without. It is an internal mirror, a reality that appears when all distractions disappear. And anyone who has faced dark nights of the soul knows exactly what I'm talking about. The impact of this is immense, because it changes the way we position ourselves in the face of suffering, doubt, and emptiness. We begin to realize that being in the abyss doesn't mean being lost. It means being at a profound point in the process, in a space where the divine is operating in silence, where the most important decisions aren't shouted. They're whispered to the soul. And perhaps that's why so many mystics spoke of silence as a gateway to revelation, because in the abyss, there's no noise, there's no stage, there's no audience, only essence, only truth. And that's why few can bear to be there, because it demands surrender. It surrenders control. It invites us to trust in a plan that hasn't yet been fully revealed, but that somehow already involves us. Tehom, then, takes on another function. It becomes a field of spiritual transformation, a sacred laboratory where the being is stripped of its layers and reborn in a way more aligned with its original purpose, not as punishment, but as a process, not as an end, but as a new beginning. And this gives us back a silent power, because it means that even in the darkest phases, there is presence. Even in the absence of signs, there is intention. Even in the darkness, there is creation. It all depends on how we choose to see, on what spiritual lens we apply to the behind-the-scenes of existence. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. If you, at some point in your life, passed through this place of silence, and today you understand a hidden truth also lived there, because now what comes to the surface is even deeper. Now I want to go even deeper into the subject, because when we move beyond literal reading and begin to delve into the symbolic layers of the abyss, everything changes perspective. Tehom, the primordial void, is not just a spiritual location. It becomes a living language, a symbol that transcends physical space and invades a realm of emotions, decisions, and even our own identity. And the curious thing is that the more we investigate, the more we realize that this symbol is everywhere, from Genesis to Revelation, from the scriptures to the human psyche. In ancestral spirituality, symbols are bridges between the invisible and the visible. They condense truths that cannot be expressed in words. And the abyss is one of these major symbols. It represents a space between two worlds, the interruption between an old form and a new one. It's that point of suspension where everything seems to fall apart, but is actually about to reorganize itself. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling of being between the end of something and the beginning of something that has not yet arrived. A sacred limbo. A portal in the form of darkness. In many mystical cultures, the abyss appears as an archetype of the return to origin, not as a regression, but as a dive to rescue what was lost, as a return to the cosmic womb, a place where the soul returns to remember what it is. This is why the abyss is not just darkness. It is a space where the divine retreats to speak in silence, where the ego is dismantled and the spirit is reshaped, a symbol of inner reconstruction. In Kabbalah, for example, there is a concept of symptom, the idea that God needed to contract, to withdraw, to make room for creation. And this empty space, this divine contraction, is where Tehom gains even more meaning. It is the interval where the universe begins to form. This teaches us that even the Creator himself respected silence before manifesting light, and that perhaps when everything around seems dark, it is because something divine is preparing the ground to reveal itself. But this symbol also carries tension, because the abyss is not a place of comfort. It demands presence. It demands a soul to take a stand. It reveals what is hidden, not only around us, but within of us. And that's why it's often avoided, because facing the abyss is facing what hasn't yet been transformed. It's seeing behind the scenes of our own choices, the limits of our beliefs, the holes left by the illusions we built along the way. This process is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also profoundly liberating, because when the symbol of the abyss is embraced, it becomes a tool of expansion. It doesn't imprison, it pushes. It doesn't destroy, it reveals. And most importantly, it cleanses. What remains after the abyss is what is essential. It is what cannot be taken away. It is who we are when we no longer have anything to support the mask. And this has a direct impact on how we live, on how we relate to our own cycles of decline, silence, and crisis, because we come to understand that these moments are not interruptions on the spiritual plane. They are part of the plan. They are the hidden codes of growth, the sacred intervals where the old dies so the new can be born. And if you've been through this, you know how real it is. This is where the symbolism of the abyss connects with our everyday journey. Because it doesn't matter if we're talking about Genesis, forbidden texts, or mystical traditions. In the end, what all of this wants to show us is that the spiritual process is not linear. It has curves, it has pauses, it has falls. And each of these phases has a purpose. The abyss is not the end. It is the crossing. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If at some point you also realize that darkness didn't distance you from God, but rather brought you closer to your essence, because now what's about to emerge comes from an even older place, deeper, and perhaps more divine. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it's one thing to hear stories. It's another to discover the evidence that was there all along, hidden between the lines, in the original languages, in silent traditions. What many people have never seen or never had access to is that there are ancient records, quotations, and interpretations that point to the abyss as something far beyond the idea of punishment, something essential in the divine engineering of the universe. In ancient documents of the Hebrew tradition, for example, Tehom is associated with the idea of unfathomable depth, not as a symbol of perdition, but as a reserve of power, a primordial force that was not destroyed, but organized. And more than that, God's creative act itself, according to certain mystical rabbis, was a process of restriction and then expansion from Tehom. This means that the abyss is not a flaw in the system, a tanned hidden system. This is where everything starts to get organized. This interpretation completely changes the mental framework with which we're accustomed to reading sacred texts, because it shows us that the divine plan didn't begin with light. It began with the management of shadow. Creation was an instantaneous act of brilliance, but a journey of separation, ordering, and decision. And if we pay attention, This is exactly the same journey we experience when we go through difficult times. First chaos, then clarity. The Zohar, a fundamental work of Kabbalah, suggests that Tehom is like a dark mirror where the future light is observed before it manifests, a kind of spiritual antechamber, a region where the invisible is clothed in intention, but has not yet transformed into matter. And this leads us to a powerful revelation. The abyss is not a place into which one falls. It is a space through which one passes. This distinction seems small, but its impact is enormous. Because the abyss is a passage, it has a purpose. It guides, it moves, it prepares. And when we look at other texts like the Apocalypse, we realize that even at the end of the story, the abyss is still there. It is referred to as a prison, yes, but also as an exit portal for certain forces. This reinforces the idea that the abyss is not just a place of the wicked, but a spiritual storage zone, an archive of what still needs to be resolved, a gap between cycles. And that's where a lot of things begin to make sense. Because several spiritual accounts speak of descents into the underworld, not as punishment, but as a mission. Christ himself, according to some traditions, descended into the depths before being resurrected. Moses had to climb the mountain, but Elijah heard God in the silence of the cave. There's always this pattern. The plunge before the revelation, the retreat before the expansion, the emptiness before the fullness. This shows that the abyss can paradoxically be an answer. It is a space where the divine works unhurriedly, where time loses meaning, where what is being generated cannot be rushed. It is a place of silent revelations. And if we are even bolder, we can say that Tehom is one of the first holy places mentioned in the Bible, even if no one recognizes it as such. Because what is sacred sometimes doesn't shine. What is holy sometimes frightens. The true impact of the abyss lies not in its terror, but in its depth. It is proof that God is not afraid of the shadow. And if he isn't, why should we be? Why do we so avoid silence, doubt, and the crossing? The answer, perhaps, lies in that call we feel when everything falls apart. Because it is at that very point that what is eternal begins to emerge. And when we look at these ancient records, at this forgotten evidence, we understand that the abyss was meant to be. It is part of the cycle, part of the design, part of our own journey. It is not a place of stagnation. It is a space of transition. And recognizing this gives us back a power that was long ago taken from us. The power to cross, to not stop in fear, to keep going even without seeing. Write in the comments, I'm on this journey too. If this vision has begun to unlock something in you, because the next layer of this mystery may be the most perplexing of all. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because after everything we've been through so far, the silence before the word, Tehom as a spiritual cradle of creation, the forgotten revelations in the banned texts, the symbol of the abyss as an inevitable stage of the journey, a new question arises, perhaps the most uncomfortable of all. What if the abyss is not just outside of us? What if it is a dimension that inhabits us? It's strange to think this way, but at the same time, it's profoundly true. The abyss as a divine concept isn't just geographical or theological. It's psychological, emotional, existential. Every time we're confronted with a moment without answers, with a loss that shatters our structures, with a silence no one hears anymore, there's the abyss, not as punishment, but as part of a process that invites us to break free from the surface. Because only deep down does the cry become listening. And perhaps that's why so many spiritual masters, even without using this language, have gone through these cycles. Moses had the desert, Jesus, Gethsemane, Paul, the time of silence. All in some way face this inner place where no light shines, but where everything begins to reorganize itself. What sustained them? Faith? Clarity? Or simply total surrender to a process they knew they couldn't master? Perhaps the answer lies in what no doctrine can explain. Only experience can support. And that's what transforms everything. Because the abyss ceases to be something to avoid and becomes a territory to understand. It invites us to let go of control, to abandon what is merely appearance, to reconsider our decisions, our constructs, our inherited beliefs. It is that moment when the soul bends, not out of weakness, but out of reverence for what cannot be manipulated. And that is frightening, but also sacred, This awareness changes our relationship with pain, with time, with the rush to have everything resolved, because we understand that some revelations only come after the fall, and that some answers come not to soothe, but to expand. The hidden truth of the abyss is that it reveals the part of God that doesn't shout, that doesn't impose itself, that simply waits, silently, until we are ready. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Creator himself left the abyss there in the beginning, not as a punishment for man, but as a reminder to himself, a dark mirror where even light would have to gaze before being born, a border between being and non-being, a place where even angels hesitate to enter, but which seekers cross, because they know that it is there where everything seems empty, that the densest presence manifests itself. And if it's true that the abyss was never a mistake, but an essential part of the journey, then perhaps what you're experiencing now, this moment of silence, of doubt, of transformation, is not the end. It's the crossing, the preparation for something that can only be born after breaking, because sometimes it's in the dark that the eyes of the soul learn to see. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you too feel that there is something sacred hidden in your own abysses, because now, the next step is to look at who was the first to fall into this void and what this reveals about the origin of the fall and the plan behind it. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized the depth of this conversation. And if this message touched something you might not have known was there, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we don't skim the surface. We dive in. Each video is conceived as a new key, a new layer of this journey that, deep down, is as much yours as it is mine. Leave a like if this connection resonated with you. That's what shows this type of content has value and deserves to continue. And comment below. I'm with you until the end, just so I know you walked with me this far. Your presence here makes a difference. And if you want to continue this journey, there's a video right here that goes into more detail on this topic. Click through and follow me there. There's still a lot to be revealed.